Okay, good evening, okay, everyone. Today is January 11, am I right? Okay, Tuesday, and that's 2023, our first section of Confucius Analects. So we last year, we are on book 8, chapter 17. So today we are going to start from book 8, chapter 18, and chapter 19, and then we will finish book 8. Then we will move on to book 9. And as our tradition, we will start to read 2 translations, and then I will read my translation, then we will have some discussion. Yeah, okay. Let's start from book 8, chapter 18.
Jason, I think we did the 18. I think we're on 19.
Really?
I think so. It seems very fine.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you are right. Okay. Okay. Let me rephrase. Okay. We should start from book 20. Sorry, book 8, chapter 20 and the 21st. Okay. We did the book 18 and the 19 already. So we will read the 2 translations. Please raise your hand if you would like to read book chapter 20. Penny, please.
Are we not muted? Chapter 20, book 8.
Go ahead, just go.
Shun had 5 ministers, and the empire was well governed. King Wu said, I have 10 able ministers. Confucius said, is it not the saying that talents are difficult to find true? Only when the dynasties of Tang and Yu met were they more abundant than in this of Chao, yet there was a woman among them. The able ministers were no more than 9 men. King Wan possessed 2 of the 3 parts of the empire, and with those he served the dynasty of Yan. The virtue of the house of Chao may be said to have reached the highest point indeed.
Thank you, Penny. No, Amang, please.
I can read the DK Lao Analects, book 8, chapter 20. Shun had 5 officials, and the empire was well governed. King Wu said, I have 10 capable officials. Confucius commented, how true it is that talent is difficult to find. The period of Tang and Yu was rich in talent. With a woman amongst them, there were in fact only 9. The Zhou continued to serve the Yin when it was in possession of 2/3 of the empire. Its virtue can be said to have been the highest.
Thank you, Amang. And I believe this one is naturally difficult. Okay, so without further explanation, so let me read my own translation first, and then let's talk about the detail. Chapter 20. Sun had 5 ministers, and the world was orderly governed. King Wu of Zhou said, I had 10 ministers to curtail the turmoil. So the first paragraph, okay, is talking about the ancient time, and we are talking about 1,000 years before Confucius' time. So Sun is the ancient sage king. He said that he had 5 ministers, and then he can govern the world orderly. King Wu of Zhou, who is about 500 years before Confucius, he said he has 10 ministers to curtail the turmoil. Okay, in the Chinese, it's called 乱臣. Okay, the meaning means the minister can curtail the turmoil. So Confucius then start to have a comment. Okay, so Confucius said, finding able and talented people is difficult. Is it not so? That's Confucius taught. In the time of Yao and Sun, the able and talented people were most abundant. One of King Wu's ministers was a woman. He had 9 only. Okay, so that's Confucius, the first part of comment. Confucius said, finding the able people and the talented people is very difficult. That's his foundation belief. Then he talked about, I think some translation called Tang Yu, okay, because Chinese use Tang Yu. Actually, Tang Yu means Yao and Sun. That means the first 2 ancient kings, first 2 sage kings. So their, we will say tribe name, okay, is Tang and Yu. So I just direct change to Yao and Sun because it's when they talk about Tang, okay, it's the same as this person, Sun. So that's the very confusing part. So I decided to change to Yao and Sun. So Confucius said during that time, in this world has the most able and talented people. That's a Confucius belief. And I call it historical degeneration because the Confucius belief in the ancient time is the peak time. And we get worse and worse and worse. Okay, so the best way is try to restore the ancient time. So I'm not saying I agree with that, but that's Confucius' belief. Okay, so Confucius said, okay, so it's difficult during that time. The talent people were most abundant. Okay, then he shifted to the second part of comment. Okay, which is he's talking about 500 years before his time. He talked about one of King Wu's minister was a woman. Okay, because King Wu said he has 10 ministers, but actually only 9. One was his wife. So only 9. So woman doesn't count. Sorry, that's Confucius' view. So he only has 9. So then he makes his second comment. Even though the kingdom of Zhou has 2/3 of the world, the emperor still submitted to the Yin dynasty. The virtue of Zhou could be said to have been the highest. So this part is different subject, not talking about the talented and able people. This part is talk about the virtue of the kingdom of Zhou. Okay, he said Zhou even owned, because at that time Zhou is not emperor of the China, but the emperor is Yin dynasty. So the kingdom of Zhou is a feudal lord. Okay, but the Zhou already have 2/3 of the country, but they still submit to Yin dynasty. So for this, Confucius consider it's the highest virtue. So that's the 2 parts of Confucius' comment. One is talking about the talent is difficult and they're difficult to find talent. Second, he's talking about the virtue of the kingdom of Zhou. Okay, so that's his comment. So Among, you have any? I believe you have something to talk about this.
Yes, I actually, walking through it with you like this, I would love to be able to rescind my edit that is still sitting on there. But it is hard to get sort of the time frame down because he moves from 1,000 years to 500 years to not current after Wu, but not contemporary to him. So it is clearer now as you sort of set it out like that. Otherwise, I've seen this translated and often understood it to be that he was singing the praises of the Zhou kingdom as it stood currently with 2/3 of the world in its holding. But if you read it as the kingdom of Zhou possessed 2/3 of the world being what they knew of as China, even during the time of the Yin dynasty, and that was why it could be said that the Zhou's virtue was at its highest, it makes a great deal more sense. When I think we left off at last year, one of the things I pointed out was that these next three verses, verse 19 speaks of Yao, verse 20 speaks of Shun, and then verse 21 begins talking about Yu. So they establish the hierarchy of who was most important in that sort of pecking order and who is to be seen as the most virtuous, Yao, to the quote unquote least virtuous of the most virtuous people, Yu. This is significant because it has to deal with succession and how it was chosen to pass the emperor, the title of emperor, from within hereditary, father to son. Even though these ancient sage kings, there was a precedent for passing it based on merit. And so I think this edit choice and this ordering of hierarchy is to reinforce the norm that was at the time to inherit the throne.
Thank you, Amam. Any comment, question, anything to add on? Huang?
Yes. Maybe I agree with Amon that there's a kind of moral hierarchy, but there's also a very down-to-earth chronology, in the sense that Yao was about 2200 BCE. Shun was after him, and after that we have Yu. Well, I'm sorry. Yao was about 2700 BCE, and Yu was about 2200 BCE. So there's also the famous chronology from the Shang-Rang system, meaning that you will select the most virtuous, to a hereditary monarchy, which will begin with the Yu precisely, creating the Xia dynasty.
Thank you, Huang. Sebastian, please.
Yes. When you use the word merit and virtue, are they synonymous? In other words, my confusion or my thought was that it seems that if you're virtuous, you've assumed a certain amount of merit.
Yeah.
And the merit, is that correct, or is that a different way of looking at it? Because it seems as though the virtue has to come from within, and the merit has to come from without. And how does one, differentiate that, and how does the hierarchy look at it? They have
Who are you asking?
Okay, let's go ahead. Amang answer this question. Yeah, please.
No, it was Quan he was asking. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Quan, I think we can all answer that question because it's a difficult question. But as usual, I would take a center with vocabulary. Okay, because in Chinese, virtue is 德, and virtue has a certain superiority. Okay, because virtue is something that has been granted by heaven. Okay, and the Chinese word for merit or to be meritorious is xian. Okay, and xian is that you would do something to make yourself meritorious. Okay, that you are something that is someone that who is hardworking, who is diligent, who is careful in his job. Okay, so xian is a little bit inferior to 德, because 德 is something granted by heaven. Okay, so for example, if you are a king in the Chinese system of philosophy, it's because heaven granted you that inner spiritual power, okay, that would attract men of talent who would want to serve you and to serve the nation through you. So you have the virtue and you have the talent.
Thank you, Huang. And that's a very difficult answer. I hope, Sebastian, does Huang answer your question?
In a way, yes, it seems that one is pragmatic and the other seems to be a gift. And if you have the gift, you are virtuous, and if you you need to have a certain level of merit. But I see that there's a almost like a wave of thought just going through it, and I'll keep it.
Yeah, I think we all
work
keep
with
it.
that. I'll work with that.
My personal opinion is this. I find out ancient Chinese very difficult. The one idea is very difficult to understand. It's about the causation and the result. Because what's the cause, what's the result, it's not very clear. So you said I have a virtue, so I have a merit, or I'm married, so it's very difficult. It's not clear in the text. So this concept is not clear until the Buddhism bring to China, that the thinking become more clear. So that's my personal opinion. I'm not sure everybody understand, agree with me or not, but at least, that's when I do the translation, I find out there's no causation because this, therefore this is not very clear. So
yeah.
Right.
I would like to say that if you use a Christian terminology, Te is more divine. You are closer to God. Okay, so
so usually in the ancient time, we will call the emperor, right? Is has a virtue, okay, and then for the minister, it's xian, okay, it's talent, okay. So in a way, you can look at in this kind of structure, but not 100% clear. But it's roughly this way.
Yes, I just want to take 10 seconds, okay? Because one of the French general gave a very good definition of what is a leader, okay? A leader is someone doing nothing and supervising everything and inspiring everybody, okay? That is Te. You do nothing, but you supervise everything and you inspire everybody. And the xian is you are more at the doing level, but you are a good doer. You're careful and you perform well.
Okay. Thank you, Huang. Alison, you have a comment, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering, with this idea of hereditary rights, in China, do they still exist? Like, is it codified that that parents have to leave things to their children? Because I'm wondering, I don't know, I've been studying monarchies and I'm trying to figure out if there's a correlation between current laws where, like in America, it's not codified at all. There's no law saying who you have to leave things to. There's no laws about inheritance. You just decide who you want it to go to. But I'm wondering if like countries that have had monarchies in the past have a more of a chance of having these laws codified, because you feel like, like if somebody is chosen as a leader, then that is, it's like their gift and they must pass it down. I don't know. It's just something that I'm thinking about because it's another meetup I'm leading, but I'm just curious if you know.
But what do you mean by a gift passing down? Do you mean the spiritual gift, or
right? Because like we think of like a spiritual gift being passed down, and that you have a right to be a leader, so your children have the right to be a leader. And then if there's a correlation into modern day times with inheritance, where it's like you must give it to your children.
Okay, so that's
yes. Wow.
Then that does have Amang answer. Then you answer this question. Okay, please. Okay, Amang, please.
So real quick, no and yes. And the reason I can say both those things is that no, there isn't a law on the books per se. And even if there were, something to appreciate about modern day China is that it is not a nation of law. It is a nation of relationships. And so even if there are districts, prefects, cities where it is written in that inheritance must work XYZ way, if you know somebody, then you are able to move the machinery so that that law may not apply to you. It is not a strict law. As far as inheritance goes, in terms of sort of the Chinese zeitgeist, nepotism is a very real thing. It is very common for things for fortunes, for businesses, for pursuits to be passed down within a family. And that may have some tie into this idea of meritorious inheritance or the duh of a family. It can also have to do with a concept that in Chinese is called jing. It doesn't have an English equivalent, but it basically means sort of the distilled essence that is passed on to you from your progenitors. We have an immediate inclination to think of like DNA, but when I taught this, I always said, you know, I do Tai Chi. I worked as a massage therapist. My father and mother met in a yoga temple, and I had no knowledge of the man. There's not a gene that leads you to something like Tai Chi, yoga, but Chinese would say, oh, that's your family Jing. It's in your Chinese family. It's in your family's essence to be drawn to something like this. And so that concept undergirds this idea of it is right that you should take over this business, this pursuit, this activity. But as far as the nation of law goes, that may or may not be true, but is almost a moot point in the modern world of China.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much.
Kwang, please.
Yes, I would like to go back to the monarchy. Okay, in the West, the kings believe themselves to have been granted power by God. Okay, so there is a divine and spiritual justification of being a ruler. For example, when Charles I was confronted Cromwell, it was precisely on that point, okay, that Charles I was absolutely convinced that he cannot granted anything from his royal power because it has been given to him by God. And because it has been given by God, he cannot relinquish it. Well, in China also, a family is granted the royal power. Ta Fu is called the great happiness or the great fortune because the first ancestor concentrated in him such a powerful virtue that it's natural that he's granted royal status, and that concentration of virtue will keep on the dynasty as long as they are capable to maintain it. But if that concentration drops, they will lose the mandate of heaven. And there will be a new son of heaven having the new high concentration of spiritual power, the famous Te, the charismatic virtue.
Thank you, Kwang. So let's move on for the chapter 21. Okay, then we finish the book 8, and the 21 is similar, just like Amang mentioned. Okay, 19 talk about Yao, the very first sage king. Second one, chapter 20 talk about Sun is the second one, and the last one, chapter 21 talk about Yu is the third one. So remember, I think if you want to know Chinese ancient sage kings, only remember 3. Okay, that will be in the test. Okay, Yao, Sun, and Yu. That's the 3 people. When we say 3 sage kings, that's these 3. No other one, no fourth one. That's the 3 most important. That's ABC, the first step you need to remember. So let's start from 21, chapter 21. So I will assume is Penny going to read your version?
Yes, and this is the James Legge,
Vicky, okay.
chapter 21. The master said, I can find no flaw in the character of you. He used himself coarse food and drink, but displayed the utmost filial piety towards the spirits. His ordinary garments were poor, but he displayed the utmost elegance in his sacrificial cap and apron. He lived in a low, mean house, but expended all his strength on the ditches and water channels. I can find nothing like a flaw in you.
Thank you, Penny. And Aman, please.
Let's see, book 8, verse 21. This is the Lao version. The master said, with you, I can find no fault. He ate and drank the meanest fare while making offerings to ancestral spirits and gods with the utmost devotion, proper to a descendant. He wore coarse clothes while sparing no splendor in his robes and caps on sacrificial occasions. He lived in lowly dwellings while devoting all his energy to the building of irrigation channels. With you, I can find no fault.
Thank you, Aman. I believe this one I will consider the easy one to understand because it talk about the sage king Yu. The third sage kings, and he talk about Confucius mentioned about his 3 things about his food, his clothes, his living. That's the basic thing. Okay, he be very frugal to himself, but he will do it well for the public. I think that's the essence of this chapter. The master said, I find no flaws in King Yu. His daily food and drink were little, but he perfected the sacrificial xiao, which is filial piety, to the ancestral spirit. His usual clothes were coarse, but he perfected the beauty of ritualistic robes and caps. His palace and the living chamber were humble, but he devoted all his effort in building waterways for irrigation. I find no flaws in King Yu. Confucius' rhetoric, okay, whenever he will make it emphasize, he will start from a sentence and end with the same sentence. When he said, Hui, his student, is great, he will say, Hui is great. And they talk about to the very end, he will repeat, Hui is great again. So if you pay attention, that's Confucian way of rhetoric. So you will say, I find no flaw in King Yu, and also end with, I find no flaw in King Yu. Okay, that's the first thing I like to mention. Second, he talking about King Yu, he not building fancy house or palace for himself, but he devoted to building the waterway irrigation because he's famous for building. At that time, the Yellow River had a lot of flood, and he built the ditches to, release the flood. That's why, he deserved the position as an emperor during that time. So that's the historical account. Yeah. So thank you. And then Aman, you have, please comment.
The only thing I want to bring up is that it's interesting that this last one starts with, I find no fault in you, and ends with, I find no fault in you, because it could be asked, you could almost hear the conversation, was he wrong? Because he didn't follow what Shun did and what Yao did. He did something different. So was he a mistaken emperor? Did he just lose his mind? Did he not appreciate shao and how to respect what was done before him. And so here's Confucius put in this position, and he has to start by saying, look, class, I find no fault in you. Here are the meritus that, here are the virtuous, meritus, quality things of Ren that he did. And he has to end with the reiteration, I find no fault in you, even though you broke the mold, as it were, from the previous two sage kings. And that was the central thesis of Confucius' ideas, were that we need to get back to respecting our traditions and following what was. And then you go through the sage kings and it's like, whoa, 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 he didn't do that. So was he wrong? You can almost see that smartass in class making Confucius want to pull his hair and, throwing off the whole lesson plan for the day. Every class has one of these. I wish I knew who asked the question, and I have my own bets on who it might have been. But I do like this as sort of the closing chapter, because it says, even though, yes, this is what we are trying to do, and even though we are the holders and caretakers of tradition, there may be a time where tradition has to be broken, but if it is to be broken, it can only be broken if you are doing it from the highest level of virtuous character, for real and significant reason, not because of the capricious whims of society of the time or how you feel about something. And that's why these were sage kings, because they had the wisdom to know when to do this. You can't expect yourself to necessarily hold that same degree of wisdom. And that was reiterated chapters earlier when people asked Confucius, are you a sage? And no, I'm nothing like that. Interesting. That's all I have to say about that.
Kwang, please.
Yes, I would like to have a comment on the fact that this last chapter, paragraph of chapter A, is very interesting, because there is a certain tension between two visions of reality within Chinese civilization. Okay, you have the side that would extol or praise the guy living simply, being thrifty, and let's say a certain ideal of poverty. Okay, and the other side, you have what I would call the more grandiose, aristocratic or monarchic ideal, having the finest beauty for the ritual robes and creating a civilization, and not hesitating to spend money to create the mere beauty without any practical reasons. And let's not forget that the transition from the spring and autumn period to the Warring State period at around 450 BCE is precisely that transition from a simple life to something more extravagant, okay, that would prepare for the creation of the Chinese Empire in 221 BCE. And I would say that that last paragraph is very interesting, because you have the two Chinese ideals, simplicity and even poverty, and technological advancement and grandeur. And let's not forget that the empire will appear about in 221 BCE, and from that transition 450 BCE to 221 BCE, it's about 250 years or 10 generations.
Yeah, thank you, Kwang. And is anybody want to answer or tell what's the tradition you broke, the most serious one? Actually, you broke tradition,
yes.
right?
Wow, his son will create first hereditary monarchy, precisely.
Yeah, so basically, I think the hidden question here could be when Confucius says, "I find no flaws in King Yu," the biggest flaw could be from the Yao and Sun. Okay, Sun is not Yao's son because Sun has married. Okay, so Yao gives the throne to Sun, and then Yu has built the waterway and then saved the flood, saved a lot of people. It's a great virtue contribution to the country. So Sun, instead of give the throne to his son, he gave to Yu. Okay, but when Yu getting old, he didn't give his throne to the virtuous people. He gave to his son. So that's the starting of the heredity, okay, in the Chinese tradition. So that's a question for 1,000 years people want to ask, but dare not to ask. So, so we are finished.
I gotta say, somebody ask it though, because Confucius had to answer the question.
Yeah, must be Zai Wo or something.
Yes, yes. But I would say that thanks God, Qi, the son of Yu, created the first hereditary monarchy, because China would not be China today if they did not start the first monarchy, because you cannot have grandeur with a mix of tribes. You have to get some kind resembling a monarchy.
Yeah, that's the decision. But and another way to look at it is Yao and the Sun is just a fake story because that's not possible to in the ancient tribe. You will give the throne to the virtuous people.
Yeah.
It just power.
Well, Jason, precisely. If you look at the Mongols, for example, they were nomads and they were tribes. And you don't have hereditary monarchy because the king or the chief has to be a strong man for the tribe to survive. But if you have a sophisticated monarchy, your son can be weak, but if you have minister to help him, it's possible to maintain the kingdom. So it's a more sophisticated level of state.
I agree. Thank you. Tim, please.
I think this verse brought me a lot of consideration and contemplation about our current society how our society is organized currently in mainland China. Since Yu was a very good example of our traditional governing model of traditional China. So he set an example of what a good governor is by taking his people into consideration, as well as taking the heaven and the earth, the ghost and gods into consideration, and taking good care of them by providing sacrifices and providing his not providing just his worshipness and like respect to a higher level of existence beyond humans. So and it's kind of an example of a good a society is, which contains a lot of humanity inside. If a society is less human, that could mean that the governor is not taking consideration of the people, as well as not respecting the not respecting the gods and respecting the heavens, and also also to the ghost, I think. Okay, so what I think is I'm trying to compare this model that provided in Confucius Analects to our current societal model currently in mainland China. Because I think for me, I think not only humans are suffering somewhere in our continent or our region, but also animals are suffering as well, because animals are not taking into consideration even in COVID-19, this kind of thing. And okay, I think animals are not taken care of nicely. Not to mention that we are trying to deny the existence of gods and heaven and such thing. Okay, so indeed, that's my contemplation.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's a great closing for book 8. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And also remind me when Confucius talk about these 3 things, it's not random, right? He talk about the spiritual, which is his ancestor, and we call ghost, or the spirit, and he talk about the cross, which is about the ritual, and he talk about the building the waterway, which is about common people's benefit. So actually, that's the 3 important things in the ancient time, and probably also today. So I think that's a great closing for book 8. Thank you, Tim, for the comment. And anything else? Otherwise, I'm going to move to book 9. Okay, so let's officially move to book 9. And the book 9's title is very strange. Okay, in Chinese, read as 直喊. Okay, that means the master really. Okay, actually, because the Chinese tradition take the first 2 characters as the chapter name. So the book, chapter 1 start with the master really spoke something. So it takes master rarely. So it reads as 直喊. So if you read some other translation, they may put this the title name as 直喊. Okay, so that's a little bit strange. So anyone have any general comment on book 9? If no, then we will read chapter by chapter. Okay, let's start from chapter 1. Penny, please.
Okay, chapter 1, book 9. The subjects of which the master seldom spoke were profitableness, and also the appointments of heaven and perfect virtue.
So based on this translation, is these 3 things Confucius hardly spoke, right? Among you have.
Yes. Book 9, the Zihan. The occasions on which the master talked about profit, destiny, and benevolence were rare.
Okay, thank you. I probably have a different translation, translated in a different way, because this translation probably doesn't make sense. So, because I think Confucius is talking about 人, because he used the word 人. So, okay, so that's my translation. Okay. The master rarely spoke about the advantages in relation to fate or with 人. Okay. So, because if you go through the Chinese word, it says the master hardly spoke benefit or advantages, then use the word 与. 与 could be means agree with or end. So a lot of translation will say the master rarely spoke the benefit and the fate and the run, which doesn't make sense because Confucius in this 10,000 character book, he mentioned Ren 100 times. So it's hard to just say Confucius hardly spoke Ren. Another interpretation will say, yeah, Confucius want people to practice Ren, not just spoke Ren. Okay. So that's I kind of not agree on this kind of translation. So I will read this word 与 means in relation, agree with. That means because Confucius also talk about fate a lot. Fate may not be the right translation if you call it heaven's mandate. Okay, so consider talk this one a lot, so-called mean. Okay, Confucius also talk this one a lot. So I think in this chapter, some disciple is talking about Confucius rarely spoke the advantage associated or in related to fate and with Ren. That means he's not going to convince you to practice Ren for some advantage. Okay, so I think that's the way of translation. I think that make more sense. Yeah. So, Amang, you have any comment on this?
Yeah, I wanted to say I agree with your translation, and it made this make a lot more sense, because to say the master rarely spoke of Ren is to not have read the entire rest of the Analects, or to say that he rarely spoke of fate. He certainly addresses these things, but to talk about it from a position of the advantage or the benefit that these things give one, that is something I could see someone speaking about Confucius on, in terms of saying these were spoken of as good for their own sake, not good because they are more liable to land you a job, more liable to get you a better wife, a better X, Y, or Z. It's not about it advantaging you in some specific way in life. It is about bettering you, and that is an overall advantage. So it doesn't need the elaboration of here's why. So yeah, I really appreciate your translation, because I think it does a better job of making sense of a passage that has vexed many a person saying this makes no sense.
Thank you, Amang. Any comment? Kwang, you have no comment?
No comment, except that your translation is truly outstanding.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, you agree. So you agree. That's great. Okay, so Sebastian, please.
I'm trying to break this wall in my mind for a moment. When you use the word advantage, okay, in that statement, if you just isolated advantage, it has two ends to it. I can see the I guess the heavenly aspect of it, but on the other hand, there has to be something that you can put your feet down and say, okay, I'll be a better person, and I understand that will be possible. But on the other hand, there is certain advantages to think in this way. You don't have to act. You can just be there and just relax and accept it. Is that something that's important in that sentence that's being made?
Okay, let me answer this question, because the word I translate as advantage. Okay, the word in the Chinese word called li. Okay, li means sharp, utilitarian, benefit, advantage. So I think advantage is the close translation, but it's not exact. So to understand, I think there's another chapter. I cannot think about the exactly word, but basically what my understanding is, Confucius is not a utilitarian. Confucius is deontologist. So he practiced Ren and he talk about Ming or the fate. It's the purpose. It's not doing this for the purpose of something else. I think that's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay.
No more comment. This one is short, and then so let's move on. If no question, if you have a question, we can come back always. Okay. So next one, chapter 2. Penny, please.
A man at the village of Chaosheng said, "Great indeed is the philosopher Kung. His learning is extensive, and yet he does not render his name famous by any particular thing." The master heard the observation and said to his disciples, "What shall I practice? Shall I practice charioteering or shall I practice archery? I will practice charioteering."
Thank you, Penny. Aman, please.
Book 9, verse 2. A man from the village of Daxiang said, "Great indeed is Confucius. He has wide learning, but has not made a name for himself in any field." The master, on hearing this, said to his disciples, "What should I make myself proficient in? In driving or in archery? I think I would prefer driving."
Thank you, Aman. I think that this most part of this book is about Confucius epistemology. Okay, so I think you will see a lot of things related, not all, but a lot of things related. And this one start with the people in Daxiang, okay, which is the alley of Xiang, okay, some neighborhood. I have no idea where it is, but that's Confucius' disciple recorded. The people from Daxiang said, "How great Confucius is. His learning is so broad, yet he is not famous for mastering any particular art." When the master heard this, he said to his disciple, "What shall I master? Shall I master charioteering or driving? Shall I master archery? I shall master charioteering." Okay. So here, I think it becomes with a question, right? Confucius is famous for his wide knowledge. His learning is so broad, and he must be very good on the so-called six liberal art during that time: the rituals, music, archery, charioteering, writing, and arithmetics. Okay, that's my translation. So this art, so he probably pretty good on broad knowledge. And the people ask, and does Confucius specialize in anything? So here comes the question, right? You should go in specialization or should have a broad knowledge. So Confucius' answer is interesting. Is what should I master, right? Driving, charioteering, or archery. Okay. So he talked about charioteering. Okay, charioteering. Okay. So according to Zhu Xi's interpretation, because charioteering is a kind of low job because you are driving. Okay. So Confucius will pick the lowest one, okay, because he's humble. But that's Zhu Xi, okay, the 11th century philosopher in China has this kind of explanation. So that's my translation. So Aman, please comment.
I agree with your translation. I would like to say I do think I think this is one of the very rare instances where you get to see Confucius' sense of humor, which is not something on display very often. Granted, charioteering may have been considered the lowly art, but if you look at the other options, it's the most expensive. It cost a lot more to get horses and chariots and stables and all that would be required of being proficient at the art of charioteering versus, art or music, even archery or arithmetic or writing. For those, you don't need heavy equipment, as it were. And Confucius was notoriously not rich. And so I think his humor is on display here when he's being told, master, they're wondering why you don't specialize in something. I think I'll specialize in charioteering. Let's just get a chariot and we'll get right on that, shall we? I think is the unspoken bit there. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
I like it. I never thought about this. I think that's great. Great answer, and that's true though. Actually, only this one needs to spend some money, and the rest of them you probably can do it. Huang, please.
Yes, 2 things. I think that Ammon is right to stress that Confucius has a special sense of humor. And I would say that he's even a sarcastic person. And if you read the 20 chapters of the Analects attentively, you will see a sarcastic old man, okay, but not in the bad sense of the term, ironical. Okay, so I think because of that, it's a good idea to read the rest of the Analects later, so to discover those things that we need more mental energy to see. And the other thing that here precisely is a perfect illustration of the difference between Te and Tsai precisely. Okay, Te, the charismatic virtue, that divine concentration of spiritual power that is supposed to be granted by heaven if you go on the epistemological journey, and the development of certain specific skills.
Thank you.
The side, and its fundamental distinction between within Chinese civilization.
Thank you, Huang. And anything else? Okay, should we move on?
Just real quick, I wanted to point to this chapter as an example. If we do the art of war, here's an example of Confucius directly assaulting that sort of technical expertise as being the highest virtue.
Is he,
Sebastian, please.
is he saying that he is above this in any way? Because it seems to me if he dips his toe into a chariot or music or what have you, he has to justify who he is. So he's saying, no, I don't have to do this. And yes, my knowledge or my being is broad, and you'll have to accept that. He doesn't have to prove that he can sling an arrow or play an instrument. Is that incorrect?
No, that's perfectly correct, Sebastian.
It is.
Because you use the keyword being versus doing.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Huang, for the answer. So let's move on for chapter 3. Chapter 3. Penny, please.
Okay. The master said, the hemp ceremonial cap is what is called for in Li. Nowadays, plain silk is used. That is thrifty. I follow the general trend. To make one's bows at the base of the steps is what is called for in Li. Nowadays, people bow after ascending. That is arrogant. Though it goes against the general trend, I make my bows below.
Thank you, Penny. Amang, please.
I just have to comment that I love the leggy version. I really do. Verse 3, the master said, a ceremonial cap of linen is what is prescribed by the rites. Today, black silk is used instead. This is more frugal, and I follow the majority. To prostrate oneself before ascending the steps is what is prescribed by the rites. Today, one does so after having ascended them. This is casual, and though going against the majority, I follow the practice of doing so before ascending.
Thank you, Amang. Since Amang loves the leggy version, so I don't know I should read mine or not, but anyway, let me read. So the master said, wearing the linen cap is based on the rituals. Nowadays, people wear pure silk caps for economical reasons. I follow the trend. Bowing below the hole is based on the ritual. Nowadays, people bow after ascending. This is arrogant. Although it is against the trend, I bow below the hole. Okay, so here Confucius agreed the ritual is changing. So if it's for economical reason, he will accept. But some change of the ritual become too arrogant. He doesn't want to follow. Okay, so that's what I read. So let's see. Amang, you have a comment? I don't have a lot.
There's not a lot to this verse, but I do think this is a very good and telling one about when to follow Li and when it's okay not to follow Li. I also have to say I love the antiquated language of leggy because it really just has a flavor of the 19th century. But I find it interesting that a cap of pure silk is cheaper than hemp. It's more economical. I want everyone to appreciate that. Silk was so abundant that it was cheaper to get a silk cap than it would have been to have one spun out of hemp. And therefore, because it's economical and because there's a practical reason for changing the ritual, Confucius is okay with it, and he'll go with the trend because it makes sense. But the bowing before or after the ascent, that has nothing to do with economics. That has nothing to do with needs or hardship on people. It's just laziness. It's just laziness and a sense of arrogance and entitlement that he finds untenable. And therefore, even if he's standing against a surging crowd, he'll stop and make his bows before ascending and probably trip up other people who were too busy not paying attention to realize, oh, this is where I'm supposed to do this. It's odd to think about, but if you've ever attended a Catholic wedding, you've had the experience of following the crowd when it's time to stand, when it's time to bow, when it's time to stand, when it's time to bow. And imagine the fortitude of character to look at the crowd and say, no, this is when I stand, this is when I bow. You don't get to tell me what to do. It would be a huge bucking of the trend for most of us in that experience. He is doing that in his own lifetime, on a day in, day out basis, at a Catholic wedding, every other month virtually. So I find this chapter interesting because it speaks a lot about his character. It speaks a lot about his priorities. And it also gives you a real window into what the China of 5th century BC was like.
Thank you, Amang. Any other comment? Huang, Sebastian, a question. Penny, please.
Yeah, I had a question just in general, because it sounds like they're talking about entering some kind of a building. And is this like a special building, like a temple, so people are supposed to bow? Or did people bow like, you know, at everybody's house when they go in or something?
Yeah, but it's at the royal court. Okay, if you are summoned by the king or by the duke, normally, according to the ancient ritual, you have to bow below the step. And after you ascend the step, you bow a second time. And some modernists at the time of Confucius just forget the bow at below the step. And it's true that it can be interpreted as a kind of arrogance.
Yeah, or laziness, right? Just like
Yeah.
Or no one's looking.
yeah, because if you're under the below, and probably the duke is not able to see you, right? So, or not see clearly. And if you have a group of people, you probably not pay attention on that. So, but when you ascend it in front of the duke, they can see you, so they bow. So I think that's the situation. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, but it's also a sign that the authority at the time was challenged because they were less and less respected.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Hmm.
We move on. Question, comment? Chapter 4. Okay. Penny, please. They all-
The master forbade 4 things. One must not act on guesses. One must not demand absolute certainty. One must not be stubborn. One must not insist on oneself.
Thank you, Penny. Amon, please.
Book 9, verse 4. There were 4 things the master refused to have anything to do with. He refused to entertain conjectures or insist on certainty. He refused to be inflexible or to be egotistical.
Thank you, Amon. I think this one, for anyone to translate, that's particularly difficult because sure, Confucius talk about 4 no's, right? And read in Chinese, 无义, 必, 无故, 无我. Okay, 义, 必, 故, 我. Okay, that's 4 things. That's why I understand this book 9 is a lot of things is about epistemology. So I just have to
You can change your website tomorrow.
Okay. So the master forbade 4 things: no conjecture, no insistence, no stubbornness, no self-centeredness. Okay. So I think Confucius is talking about the how to learn knowledge, right? Or you want to call it the epistemology, right? So why not to guess in or conjecture, and you don't insist something, you don't be stubborn, and you don't put yourself as a center, just you limited by your own personal view. I think that's he meant, So Amon, please, you comment.
Yeah, I don't have a great deal to add. It is interesting: conjecture, insistence, stubbornness, and self-centeredness. These are absolutely qualities you don't want in a student, and these are qualities that you absolutely want in a student. You want somebody who is stubborn enough to stick with it. You want somebody who is self-centered enough to be willing to invest in themselves, to be there every day after again and again. You want somebody who's not satisfied with the first answer they get necessarily. Conjecture, I can see where anybody would say, yeah, you don't want somebody who's all caught up in, the grapevine. But it's funny to me because these are both qualities that you want, but you don't want them, you want them in good measure. And I have to wonder if this reporter, this person who actually was saying there's 4 things the master said he would not put up with, was a student who exhibited all those qualities in too great a measure. Sometimes Confucius seems a little inconsistent, even with himself. And this is one of those times where I feel like this was a lesson specifically for a very special student, not for everybody every time.
Yeah, thank you, Amam. I think you spoke on you as your experience as a teacher. So, so probably we can move on for the next one, because all this one chapter 9, book 9 is, most of them are short and a little bit more straightforward. Doesn't have a lot of historical background. Okay, let's start from book chapter 5. Penny, please.
Okay. The master was put in fear in Kwang. He said, after the death of King Wan, was not the cause of truth lodged here in me? If heaven had wished to let this cause of truth perish, then I, a future mortal, should not have got such a relation to that cause. While heaven does not let the cause of truth perish, what can the people of Kwang do to me?
Thank you, Penny. Amam, please.
It's ironic that you said it doesn't have a lot of historical context. This is one of the exceptions. Verse 5. When under siege in Kwang, the master said, with King Wen dead, is not culture, Wen, invested here in me? If heaven intends culture to be destroyed, those who come after me will not be able to have any part of it. If heaven does not intend this culture to be destroyed, then what can the men of Kwang do to me?
Thank you, Amam. This one is the historical background is not that difficult to understand, because that's when Confucius traveling, and then that's his second time. Okay, according to the Analects, he's in danger, right? The last time is on book 7 when Wen Tuan want to kill him. Okay, so that's the first time, and that's another time when he in the state of Kwang, okay, and someone want to kill Confucius. And why? Because there's many a story about this, but the easiest one is Yang Hu, is another powerful minister from the Ji family of state of Du. He's kind of doing a lot of bad thing. So Confucius looked like him. Okay, so people mistake Confucius as Yang Hu, so want to kill Confucius. That's one thing. One story. Another story is Confucius sit in the chariot. Okay, they have the driver. Okay, he used the same driver as Yang Hu's driver. So people say, oh, that's the same Mercedes, he's to take it. So, they thought that's Yang Hu and want to kill Confucius. So that's the second time in Analects, Confucius is in danger. So let's see how Confucius responds to this. And it's also related, he talked about fate. Okay, so the master was in danger in the state of Kwang. He said, King Wen, which is 500 years before him, okay, King Wen has already died. Are his ritualistic words not here in me? If heaven acts to end these ritualistic words, then the later generation won't retain this ritualistic word. If heaven wishes not to end this ritualistic word, then what harm can the people of Kwang do to me? That's Confucius look at the situation. the words I translate as ritualistic words, okay, and in Chinese is 章, okay, and 文章, okay. So if you read Dr. Eno's translation, he like to translate as pattern, which I disagree. You know, I think the 文章 here means the ritual, the words, the document, for the rituals. So that's why he associates with the Kinwood, who Confucius believed is the one set up, okay, with the Duke Zhou set up the ritual. So he see himself as the inherit or has this job to continue this great ritual. So when he is in danger, he said, if the heaven want to end this ritual, then I will die. But if the heaven doesn't want to continue this ritualistic words, then since I'm the person who is transmitter of this ritualistic word, then the people of Huang will not kill me. I will not die. So turn out that he survived. So that's the shows Confucius' attitude when he is in danger. So Amang, either you please comment first, then we go to Huang, please.
Just very briefly, I want to say it's interesting that this chapter follows the no conjecture, no insistence, no stubbornness, no self-centeredness, because Confucius is insisting that he is important enough that heaven will not bring about his demise. It's kind of astonishing in some ways. I wouldn't read this and immediately think, wow, what an egocentric person. But for having just read the 4 things that he forbids, then in reading this, it's hard to see, okay, how do you have this opinion? How do you have this stance and not fall prey to any of those things you forbade? I don't have an answer to that. It's just something that I have to point out because it really strikes me when I read these back to back that, oh, so the rules apply, but not necessarily to the master, or there's some deeper message here about this is not egotism. This is not insistence. This is the virtue of real wisdom versus unfounded or unmerited, unwarranted stubbornness, egocentrism, insistence, etc.
Thank you, Amang. Huang, please.
Yeah, thank you, Amon, for your words, because precisely, I think that it's one of the paragraphs that show one thing that we don't often associate with Confucianism. And that paragraph is illustrating that Confucius is having a messianic attitude, okay? In the sense that he considers himself as a person in a line of transmission of the control legacy of the Zhou dynasty, okay? And his control hero, of course, is the famous Duke Dan of Zhou. But that Duke Dan of Zhou himself has received that control legacy from his father, King Wen of Zhou, and etc. And he considered himself as one of the nexus of that control transmission. Hence, I would say that it's one of the rare occurrences that we feel a little bit of a messianic overtone in that Confucianist book. And messianism is not something that is related necessarily to Confucianism, but I would say that of one Zhou culture. And that is precisely one of the big things that Confucius gave to the scholars after in the Chinese history, that they are the transmitters of that antique cultural legacy,
Thank you, Kwang.
defining what China is.
Sebastian, please.
I hope these two together, chapter 4 and 5, in this regard, even though there was a negativism of the 4 components that he spoke of, is it reasonable to think that Confucius thinks that he is the ritual, that he is presenting himself to everyone, and he wants to make sure that the first 4 things that he mentioned in chapter 4 are not him or anyone that would look at the rituals in a different way. He doesn't want to be seen. Confucius doesn't want to be seen as having those four traits, but then he wants to be known as an example of the ritual and continue the rituals in the same manner that they've been given to him. So he's basically a conduit for the people because he's carrying on the tradition. Is that too far out? I'm not sure. I wrote that yesterday, and I just wanted to make sure that I have that correctly.
Yeah.
At least
Well, he pretends to be the channel for the truth, okay? Because when you insist on yourself and you're stubborn for personal things, you can be qualified as stubborn. But if you think, or you deeply convinced you're the channel for the truth within your culture, you're not stubborn for personal stuff. It's above that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I use the word messianic, okay? Even if we have to be careful because the true meaning of messianic is very specific, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Confucius is famous talking about he's not the creator or he's not the author. Okay, he is the transmitter on the book 7, chapter 1. Right, that's very famous. So he takes this one as responsibility. I think that's later on in the Neo-Confucianism in the 10th, 11th century, the Song scholar kind of take this one serious. Just even today, a lot of people will consider I have the responsibility as an intelligentsia. I will consider I have the responsibility to transmit this ancient teaching to the future generation. I think that's in Confucius.
Yeah. Exactly. And the famous quote that you just mentioned, Jason, often is wrongly interpreted as Confucius being very modest. On the contrary, he was not being modest, okay? He was saying that I am the channel transmitting the legacy of the ancient sage kings, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. Yeah. Any other comment?
Indeed, I think from my point of view, I think that it's very cool of Confucius that he think himself as a tunnel of some he considered himself to be a tunnel of some sort of knowledge to govern the country. And contemporary, recent decades or recent centuries, we think that we know the knowledge, we own the knowledge, and we are the master of the knowledge. Instead, Confucius think he is just a tunnel of that knowledge of. And if the heaven want him to master, if the heaven want to pass this knowledge or this vibration to people, then this knowledge will exist, but if the heaven or the higher energy or higher vibration, let's see the four-dimensional beings does not want this kind of culture or knowledge to exist among humans, then he will not function as this tunnel. He cannot function as this tunnel. So I think it's very futuristic of him for us, for us as some people in the 21st century. I think he's pretty much very futuristic indeed.
Okay. Thank you.
I would say that he's timeless, okay, because it's eternity, that he's timeless.
Indeed.
Because that kind of, okay, it can be said 5,000 years ago, and it can be said 5,000 years in the future. That's timeless.
Yeah, that's exactly the Mencius's comment. Right? He saw Confucius is the sage of the time. This is any time you work. That's famous Mencius's comment on Confucius. Thank you, everyone. I think this simple sentence and then sounds like everyone has a different point of view. When I read this one, I think about the Confucius talk about fate because he believes that's the fate. And then among us, as a teacher's experience, he bring back to the self-centered this one. And then Huang will talk about Confucius as a transmitter. Okay, bring the responsibility to bring forward inherit the ritualistic world, and the team will start to talk about is timeless. Okay, he's looking forward looking. Okay, so that's great. You know, it's one simple sentence, and everyone read it in a different way. Any other comment? Otherwise, I will move on to chapter 6. Okay, Among not his head, so let's move on. Penny, please.
Okay. A high officer asked Zigong, saying, "May we not say that your master is a sage? How various is his ability?" Zigong said, "Certainly heaven has endowed him unlimitedly. He is about a sage, and moreover, his ability is various." The master heard of the conversation and said, "Does the high officer know me? When I was young, my condition was low, and therefore I acquired my ability in many ways, but they were mean matters. Must the superior man have such variety of ability? He does not need variety of ability."
Thank you, Penny. Among.
Book 9, verse 6. The Daizai asked Zigong, "Surely the master is a sage, is he not? Otherwise, why should he be skilled in so many things?" Zigong said, "It is true, heaven set him on the path to sagehood. However, he is skilled in many things besides." The master, on hearing this, said, "How well the Daizai knows me. I was of humble station when young. That is why I am skilled in many menial things. Should a gentleman be skilled in many things? No, not at all."
Thank you, Amang. I think this one is again same as chapter 2. Right? He is talking about the knowledge. Okay, you will know a lot of knowledge or you specialize knowledge. So it's interesting here. Confucius said, probably you don't need a lot of knowledge. Okay, so again, we still don't know what exactly Confucius thinking about. So few things, two things I like to mention before I read it. 大宅, okay, and I translate as the grand master. That's the position of the kingdom of Wu, which is on the southern part, okay, a southern part of China. So considers a little bit different than the culture. So there, instead of prime minister, and the chief minister is called grand ministers. That's why translate as 大宰, 大宰, okay. And the second thing is the disciple, 子贡, okay. If you remember, 子贡is the person who is pretty good in literature. So he is very close with Confucius. Okay, so we will see a lot of 子贡's comment about Confucius. So the grandmaster of Wu asked 子贡, your teacher must be a sage. How many skills he has? 子贡 said, because heaven allowed him to be a sage, he has many skills. The master heard of it and said, what does the grandmaster know about me? My condition was poor when I was young, and therefore I acquired skills in many low jobs. Shall a 君子 be skilled in many things? Not many. So these words, the most famous one is this Chinese word 无少也见，故多能比试, okay, which means my condition was poor when I was young, and therefore I acquired skill in many low jobs. So as we know, Confucius' father died when he was 3 years old, and then his financial situation is not good. He considered as aristocratic level, but on the low level, and not so he has to work to survive. And then what kind of low job he's doing? Most scholars believe he was doing the funeral service. He's not doing like a clean toilet, mop the floor, this kind of low job. He probably doing the funeral service as a job because he is a person, has a lot of knowledge about the ritual, and then he probably do the funeral service for the noble family. Okay, that's most scholars believe. So he talked about his condition was not good, so he can do many things. But the strange, so one thing we are sure, Confucius know many things, has many skills, because from different chapters, people comment on that. And he probably doesn't have any specialized skill. If we have to say he specialized in rituals, he know a lot on ritual. And the Confucius seems talk about the 君子 be skilled in many things, not many. I'm not sure, he's just being humble, say I don't have many skills, or he said truly believe a 君子 doesn't need many skills, so which I'm not very sure. So that's the chapter. And Amang, let's hear what's Amang's comment.
Well, he belies the old chestnut, those who can do, those who can't teach, because supposedly, he had acquired many little idiosyncratic skills through menial jobs. Funerary services were very probable, but if you think about what's involved with funerary services beyond just the sort of preparing a body and burying it, there's the records, there's the consoling and dealing with families. There are many different aspects dealing with that particular niche skill, and you get people at a very vulnerable state, so you have access to a great deal of their estates and persons that you might not otherwise have. So it probably gave him a leg up in a lot of ways, because it allowed him to start to know how to organize, start to know how to, adjust on the fly for the needs of whoever he was in front of at the time. There is one thing here, though, that I've always found interesting. Should a 君子 be skilled in many things? Not many. This feels nearly like an argument for specialization. And it never seemed that he was one for specialization, even before when he said, oh, what skill should I master? I think charioteering is what I should master. But he says not many, but what is the right amount then? Is it just the 6? Is it just a few? It's a question that I find interesting.
Thank you, Amang. Kwang, please.
It's very interesting that it's Zigong precisely who is at the center of that paragraph, because in the Analect there's a conversation between Confucius and Zigong precisely when Zigong was asking Confucius to assess him, and Confucius answered that he's a vessel, a chi, okay, and it's not necessarily a compliment because a vessel is a tool having a specific usage, okay, so a talent, a expertise. And Zigong precisely was a very, very useful disciple because he speaks many languages. He was precisely ambassador to the Wu state because they speak another language than the language of Central China. And he was a rich merchant. So he was a very useful person. But the answer of Confucius was precisely to encourage him to work more on the being dimension of his person rather than in the doing dimension of his person, because he's quite good in the doing dimension.
Thank you, Kwang. Okay, let me rephrase. Thank you. I think your comment is excellent. Yeah. So the last sentence, Confucius probably talked about to Zigong, not himself. Because Zigong is the person. I think he said Zigong being a vessel, right? A beautiful vessel, a great vessel, great usage, very useful person. Okay, so that's the interest part. Thank you, Kwang, for the comment. Any other comment? Sebastian, please. Oh, Brian. Also, let's go Sebastian and Brian. Okay, you raise your hand first. Yeah.
Realizing that he did come from somewhat of a poor background, and scholarship may not have been his forte, and he acquires different types of knowledge, maybe towards repetition, or he gets exposed to them. But I read this more as now he has, the difference between knowledge and understanding. And I think he understands his position in this, I wouldn't say hierarchy, it doesn't seem to be, I don't know who's higher than he is or who's beneath him, but it seems that he's coming to realize who he is for the people. And that's very important for him. He doesn't need any compliments. He doesn't need any scholarship. He's starting to realize that, I can be myself and I could present this to the people and I could help them. Is that somewhat in the same context, or?
I think that you are right, but one thing I'm not sure, everybody's understanding is correct about poor, okay? Because personally, I don't think Confucius is really so-called poor, okay? In today's standard, actually, when he meant poor, he doesn't mean he has no food. He probably means he's the word he in Chinese used called 贱, okay? That means in the lower position. So probably financially is not that poor, okay? So that's the thing I just want to make sure.
I'll bring that back. I didn't mean poor monetarily. I meant poor in his ability to get the scholarship, to accept certain things, to be able to read into certain books and such, and perhaps
he was a scholarly person by nature, and he probably received a good education. That's my belief. Okay,
all right.
But I'm, of course, there's no started proof of this, but
No,
for sure.
That clarifies it. That clarifies it. Okay.
And remember, there's one chapter he talked about when Confucius, the guy, they used the 周人之子, the son of the Zhou, the person. When he went to the temple, he asked everything. Okay, that's Confucius. So he probably very curious, eager to learn. So he went to the temple. He said, "Oh, why they do this? Why you wear black hat? Why you wear red robe?" So I think probably that's kind of young people he was. Yeah. Thank you. Kwang, please. Oh no, sorry, Brian first.
So I'm focusing on the meaning of that word should in the last sentence. He said, should a scholar be skilled in many things? Am I right?
You talk about the last sentence of the chapter 6?
Yeah, isn't that right?
Yes, they say the should a 君子 be skilled in many things, not many. That's his last sentence, right?
Yeah, not many. Right. So, well, that's the last idea. Should he be skilled in many things? No, not many. The word meaning of the word should, in the whole verse, I have the impression he's stating that, yes, I am one of these people, and I have skills in many things, but for you to be like me, you do not need to have skills in many things. So I would say the should can be read as need. I'm asking the question, should be read as need. It kind of makes sense to me in that way too.
Well, okay, let's put this way. Okay, I don't think they have the so-called correct answer. Okay, and I think your answer also makes sense. And like what Kwang's comment, he can read. You also can read this one as a commentary to 子贡, because 子贡definitely has many skills. Okay, and then he probably a commentary to the 子贡 said, you don't need a lot, because the Chinese word is very simple. He said, 君子多乎哉? There's no word called should. Okay, he just say 君子 many question. Okay, and they say not many. So we really don't know what's his tone. So another way I read it is, does 君子 should have a lot of, does 君子 has a lot of skill? No. Okay, he's humble. He say, okay, what I know, you say I know this. No, that's not a lot. So that's another way to read it. So technically, there's no word should. Okay, there's no word need. There's no word does. So we don't know. So we just guess. Okay. So that's the difficult part when we read Confucius, because he's not here. We don't know what's his tone. All right.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And that's why this meetup make a lot of sense to, I don't know for everyone, but at least for me, make a lot of sense, because I can only think in one way and make sure it makes sense. But from time to time, I hear people ask question or have a comment, which also makes sense, but I don't know which one is correct. Yeah. Kwang, please.
Yes, I would like to come back to the question of Sebastian concerning the social background of Confucius. Yes, he was poor compared to his cousin of the high nobility. Okay, because in China there is a social class called the Shi, S-H-I, the Shi. There's no real translation for that. Okay, but maybe the best way is gentleman, but not gentleman in the sense of 君子, okay, but gentleman in the sense of social hierarchy, because you have the rank of nobility, the dukes, the marquis, the counts, the viscount, the barons, and so on. And the sons of the barons, they are still nobleman, okay, Shi, that I call simply the simpler gentleman. but they don't have lands, they don't have mansions, they don't have gold and chariots and horses, etc. So they have to study to get a job in the future. And most of the time, they would be officers in the administration, in the army, or they would be teachers. Okay, so it's the lowest rank of nobility. So they are poor compared to the sons of the duke or of the marquis that would have the horses, the manors, the mansions, going to the restaurants, and so on. So I would say that I know that making that kind of comparison is not always easy, but he would have the kind of life of someone nowadays would correspond to the lower middle class. Okay, a quick comparison, but his advantage compared to the mass of the peasants is, and people resembling him socially speaking, is that he has access to an education.
Thank you, Kwang. Aman, please.
Yeah, we only got a couple more minutes here, but I wanted to sort of round out a little bit of what Kwang was saying. And it came up when Allison was asking about sort of the social structure of the time and place. It's worth remembering 99% of the time, 99% of the people throughout human history, if you were anything, you were probably farming. That was what most people did just to subsist, almost anywhere, everywhere in the world. And when you have large populations, having your own land to farm put you into a 10 percentile that the remaining 90 were not part of. They were communally farming shared plots of land. When you were in a gentry class in China, you had someone to do your farming for you. And the reason we know that would be because you could afford to set time aside to just study. You could learn, you could spend time to teach someone to read and write instead of sending them out to work a field. This is the strata from which Confucius comes from, this very high strata actually in society. We would think of it as sort of lower middle class perhaps in our comparison, but compared to the vast majority of the population, he is in the 1 percentile. He's at the bottom end of the 1 percentile. And being in that bottom end, there are certain conventions that would be expected, such as you don't have to go work your own field. Somebody's going to work a field. You're going to get a tax from somebody on land you own, and you are to study. But in addition to study, he had to go and get jobs because they didn't have enough, because of his father's early death, to sort of sustain this status of living. So he had to study on the one hand and work on the other, which would have been seen as gauche by a lot of his peers. But it probably gave him a great insight to people and a lot of access to opportunities that he wouldn't have had otherwise. We're really not highly aware of social class in the Western world, especially here in the United States, as other countries, other cultures are. And I've heard it said that most people are only aware one class up and one class down from them and can't even fathom the two classes beyond that and the two classes beyond that, but they exist in both directions. It's time for me to run. Thank you all. I will see you all next Tuesday, and I look forward to finishing the Analects and moving on to Sun Tzu.
Thank you, Amand, and thank you, everyone. And then just let everyone know. And this Saturday, I have the Asian philosophy. What's that? Sorry, I copied the wrong one. Sorry. On Saturday, 2 o'clock Pacific time, or the one I posted is the wrong one. Okay, sorry. Okay. Saturday, 2 o'clock in Pacific time, or 5 o'clock in Eastern time. And this week, we are going to talk about Zhu Xi, who is the Neo-Confucian, so-called the Godfather, and then I think that would be very good to compare what you read in the analog original Confucius and the Zhu Xi's idea. You will see, how does it different. The second post I post is the link for this Saturday. And remember, if you've been there, I changed the time 2 hours earlier, so it'll be 5 o'clock in East time and 2 o'clock in Pacific time. So I hope see you everyone on next Tuesday and also on Saturday, and we will continue this journey and let's step by step understand more on the ancient teaching on the other side of the world. Thank you, everyone, and then we'll see you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Kwang, can you, I send you an email. Let's talk about
Okay,
some-
cool. I will answer you by email.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.